Psychoanalysis, remember forgetting. Namaste. We forget what we don't want to forget, and we forget what we want to forget. Conversation today is on this science and art of forgetting with psychoanalysis consultant Dr. Himanshu Vaidya. Namaste, sir.
Namaste.
We all remember many things we have forgotten. It is a strange and land of irony. Can we start with unpacking the word itself, forgetting?
Forgetting is a psychological phenomena, and like other psychological phenomena, be it repression, disassociation, displacement, it is actually a category word under which a variety of things get covered. So let us look into the types of forgetting. The first forgetting is normal forgetting, something which has been long in the past, and for years we have not been in touch with it, and there's a natural forgetting of the events of long past that we are not involved with. Very normal kind of forgetting. We won't call this pathological. It's a very normal way the human mind functions. Then there is a second kind of forgetting by repression, because it is too painful, too unpleasant to remember something, and that is a purposeful forgetting. It's a defensive forgetting, that we forget because it's too painful to remember, and that is forgetting by repression. Under this broad heading of forgetting by repression, you may forget because of variety of emotions at work. Someone may forget something which is loaded with anger. Another person can forget something loaded with sadness. Third person will forget something loaded with shame. Fourth person will with guilt. Fifth person, unbearable envy. Sixth person, too anxious to remember that. So there is a huge category of forgetting, which is forgetting by repression. And the repression can be of any affect. It can be sadness, it can be guilt, it can be shame, anger, pain, anxiety. But any unbearable affect, you can forget an incident which is associated with an unbearable affect by repressing both of them. And this leads us to the next one. Forgetting something which is associated to something which is repressed. Meaning, let us say you go to a party and somebody humiliates you there, and after 2 months you just don't recollect it. But the day you went to the party, you also uh, gave 200 rupees to some shopkeeper just outside the party plot, and you had to take it back, but you forget that also, because that is in a way associated to the party plot. So the fear is, if you remember X, you can start remembering Y. Therefore, both of them are repressed. And this often happens, this kind of repression we see in the Oedipal phase. That when the Oedipus resurfaces at puberty and it becomes difficult to handle, not only the Oedipal memory is repressed, but the whole of sexuality is repressed, and at times, even the whole of uh, emotional life is repressed. And therefore, one has asexuality and isolation of affect together. That's a different kind of forgetting, that something is repressed because, not because into itself it is dangerous, but it is associated to something which is dangerous, as seen by the psyche. The third is forgetting because of cognitive thought disorder. And here, the problem is not so much of the storage of memory, it is more to do with the retrieval of memory. It is more to do with the processing of memory. And this cognitive thought disorder, as Bjorn has said, uh, is largely because of attacks on linking out of envy. Envy marshals aggression, and that leads to forgetting of this kind of thing under the cognitive thought disorder. As I have discovered, apart from attack of envy, it can also be attack of narcissistic rage. So this is a forgetting of a unique kind, forgetting under the broad heading of cognitive thought disorder. That a group of people may not have the capability of retrieving and processing even the simplest of things. And the same thing may have to be told to them 10 times. Then you have forgetting because of multiple identity disorder, or what we used to call multiple personality disorder in last DSM. So one personality does not know things about the other personality. And in multiple personality disorder, we have one major personality and the others we call as alters. So one persona does not know things about the other, and there is a kind of a interpersona complete forgetting. Another a very different kind of forgetting. And then we have forgetting of a unique kind, which I would say is forgetting of spontaneous disintegration, which happens in the artistic group. What Lacan used to say, that artist is a functioning psychotic. And to that group of artists I'm referring to, where the disintegration and emptying out of the mind happens all the time, giving all the open space for creative venturing into all strange directions. But they have a very uh, difficult part in processing and retrieving what they have put inside. So they also have a difficulty in remembering, and they forget a very different kind of forgetting. It's a kind of a a unique kind of disintegration common to one section of the artistic community. So that's a different kind of forgetting. So this is the whole uh, canvas of forgetting, and the purpose behind it is like the first one, the natural forgetting is given the way our hardware is developed. But rest of the psychological forgetting is very purposeful. It is forgetting to live. That if you don't forget, it's not easy to live. So in order to live consciously, peacefully, you forget something. So it's a forgetting for a purpose, because it's life becomes too difficult if you remember. So the unconscious mind religiously remembers to forget it.
So, besides the neurological, physiological, and psychological aspects, um, uh, before we go ahead, I would like you to explain the phenomena where a child, in general, all of us, we do not have much of memory of our 3 years, 4 years of age, and many people are not able to retrieve in 5 years and beyond. So, what is happening there with regard to the understanding of psychoanalysis?
Yeah,
How that pre-conscious and unconscious is behaving there?
yeah, good question. Uh, that is explained in psychoanalysis by a universal repression which happens at the end of Oedipus. So at the end of 4 to 5 years of age, when the Oedipus is resolved or not resolved, but repression takes
Francis.
place. Yeah, the repression takes place, and whatever is happening before that is severely repressed. So very less amount of material is able to get past that repression, which is actually a post-Oedipus repression.
So
Or we
that
can
is a
call it,
psychological phenomena of the psyche.
yeah, it's a Oedipal repression. That is one part. The If you go into pre-Oedipal pathology, then another part comes out, and that is that this kind of repression is not only Oedipal, but pre-Oedipal also this phenomena has been going on. And there we look at repression related to the split, repression related to secondary narcissism, repression related to primary narcissism, repression related to the anal phase, repression related to unbearable envy, and repression strangely uh, related to that the apperception of beauty, the aesthetic part, which produces unbearable envy. The mother or the breast seems so beautiful, repository of all the beauty in the world, that an aesthetic crisis emerges and it leads to an unbearable envy. So, at every level of phenomena, right, there is repression, because every difficult phenomena will produce difficult effect, and repression will have to be brought in some way or the other. And every repression, the moment it stretches slightly beyond the memory of the traumatic event. So not only traumatic event is forgotten, but associated things with it are also forgotten. It's the stretching of that repression barrier to cover things which indirectly also can lead to awakening of that traumatic memory. So that is how it is. And the second part is, just because it is too deep into the past and unused, there is a part natural forgetting.
But when you talk about this universal repression, that seems that everything associated, even with the bare minimum of the trauma for the infant, is being extended to the entire timeline of that age.
Correct.
But what happens when there are certain people who can remember certain things? Does that mean that there was no trauma happening, or the psyche was, while the ego was being formed, it was healthy enough to allow certain good memories in and out? What happens there? Is the its universal barrier not just a blanket for everyone? Why it is permeable for certain people?
That is a good question. It is definitely not the same for everyone, but it is near similar for a majority of people. So when we talk of exceptions, there are two important components. One is very high awareness and maturity too early. It is like a front-loaded development of the child. And when the developmental process is front-loaded and there is too high an awareness, too early an ego buildup, then the repression that you see leaves out vacant spots. And in those vacant spots, one is able to go back and see those memories. The second part is, there are also very good memories, and those good memories provide a safe passage for entry and exit. And the third component is, constitutionally, this group is very cheerful, very full of positivity, and very tolerating of what otherwise is a taboo. And therefore, the taboo component of repression is much weaker in this group. That is how they are able to navigate through those open spaces.
You talked about forgetting for a purpose, or rather, we can say selective forgetting. So, coming to this selective and sometimes purposeful forgetting, some clients complain of forgetting across life. How do we account for it?
Uh, there are two aspects to it. One is what is happening in their minds, and second is how does it affect their life. So, one is a process question of psychoanalysis, and the second part is why they do what they do, a general question. So, let us first look at the process question. Some people will forget because they have a weak memory. It may just be that everyone cannot run equally fast, and therefore everyone cannot have equally strong memory. So we may just be looking at, when you look at the memory curve, we'll be looking at the left hand extreme part of the bell curve, that we are encountering a group which naturally has a weak memory. So that may be one part of the explanation in some cases. In other cases, it has to do with repression, that too many events involved too much of pain, too much of shame, too much of something unpleasant, too much of guilt, too much of anger, and therefore there's too much of repression. And after some time, it becomes a habit that at the smallest generation of negative effect, you deploy the same defense out of habit. It may not warrant, it may not justify. The intensity of the effect generation may not justify, but habitually you apply or deploy that kind of a defense. So that is second part. The third part has to do with some esoteric mechanisms. Like we talked about multiple identity disorder, cognitive thought disorder, disintegration of an artist. So once we know what is the situation we are dealing with in particular, in specific, then we can go into the elemental roots of it, and then we can go into healing. But as a general rule, you will find three things at work: repression, cognitive thought disorder, uh, multiple personality disorder, or the artistic forgetting. These four things you will find in general.
So, sir, there was this sometimes as psychoanalysis focuses more on talking about your past, especially in Freudian school, we dig a lot of history and try to recollect things from there to make a meaning making of how the personality has evolved over a period of time. Many a times in those sessions when there are people who have these kind of issues where they cannot recollect, some are subjective, where when we induce a kind of a visualization or a hypno trance, they are able to retrieve, even if while they were claiming in the beginning that they don't have much of memory. And from the long term memory, it they can retrieve. But there's still many people
Ah,
who feel like a blank canvas. They say that we cannot see, we cannot go there, we don't feel, and there is nothing big happening. There is no trauma. What is happening in such situations?
it's just universal repression, very strong repression.
Over a period of till some many have said 13 14 के बाद पहले का भी कुछ याद नहीं है.
Correct.
Is it for them the Oedipus and everything took extra time to
No,
close the window?
no. Uh, the Oedipal will come into operation, the
Mm.
Oedipal repression, latest usually by puberty.
So there is no psychological delay. For example, there is a developmental delay physiologically, neurologically. What if for someone Oedipus uh, went on for a
Correct.
longer period of time? So there
Correct.
is a psychological delay.
Correct. So when we talk of developmental delays, usually we go by 2 to 3 years maximum. So let us say somebody says, I don't remember anything before 15 years.
Yes.
Right? Now you can still stretch the Oedipus. That at puberty, the Oedipus would again re-emerge with reinvigorated force. And let us say that there was a developmental delay, or because of some reason it stretched over. Maybe the stimulus in the environment was such that what usually happens at 12 to 14 stretch to 15 or 16 at the best. But let us say somebody comes and says, I don't remember anything before 22. Now it's very difficult to stretch the Oedipus to 22. Then
Right.
we have to look at another explanation that at 22 something has happened. So there is a new event at 22 which is so unpleasant that it has to be repressed. And everything associated with that event also has to be repressed. And therefore the repression seems to be near universal. Now, does that mean this trauma at 22 cannot be related to Oedipus or pre-Oedipus? No, right? But it is a distinct event. It's a distinct event which is associated to Oedipus in some way. Let us say he uh, gets into a divorce at 25. He marries at 22, gets into divorce at 25, comes to you at 35, he says, I can't remember anything before 25. So what we see here is the divorce related issues are causing a huge repression. But in an essential sense, it is another Oedipal loss. So in the unconscious, it will be linked. So when you have this kind of a linkage, that the first repression, which was very heavy, happened at 5. The second repression, which was still heavier and still wider in scope in terms of the size of the net that you cast, it happened at 14 and then at 25. So when you have these three repressions linked up with the Oedipus as the core, then obviously the amount of territory that this repression will cover will be much larger than in case it would have been a standalone repression. Because now we are looking at a tree of trauma, the root, the branches, and the leaves. And the tree of trauma is developing wider with age because the roots are still the same. It's the one root, and the branches are developing. So that is how it will be, that we will be looking at new traumas, And these new traumas can be standalone traumas, or they can be a part of the tree of trauma system.
I got excited with this little example while you were sipping some water. So, what if we go back to that purposeful forgetting and selective forgetting?
Right. So purposeful forgetting and selective forgetting will have to deal with not only avoiding something unpleasant, but also getting along with life. Because often it may be a wise thing to forget. Like everything else, forgetting is not a unalloyed evil. Like everything else, it has to be optimized. And therefore, it can be deployed for a sublimated purpose also. And that sublimated purpose may be to get along with life. That if you remember, you will be caught into it, you will be too overwhelmed by it, and you won't be able to focus on the productive aspect of life. So for some, the best strategy may be to forget, because they may not have the time or the capacity to heal themselves. And therefore, the only way they can deal with it is to keep it in the unconscious than to keep it in the conscious. So you get on with life by forgetting. That is one part. The second part is in relational.
That reminds me of that old saying. They say that it's good to forgive and best to forget. But when we talk about best to forget, is not this um, uh, disabled version of not being able to process. Rather, this is about the effect being generated, being processed in a healthy way.
There is a difference in that saying and what we are saying. Our forgetting
Exactly.
is real forgetting. What when they say forget and forgive, they don't mean forgetting in the technical sense of the
Memory.
word. They
Right.
mean it in the operational sense of the word, in the sense of being let go. That it is still in the conscious memory. The event is not out of conscious memory, but you let go. So when they say forget, what they mean is let go.
It's not that the memory remains and the effect is processed in a certain way.
Correct. So when they say forgive and forgive, they mean not forget. They don't really mean forget. They mean let go and forgive, because you can't erase consciously the memory from the conscious.
And that's what even in the healing we tell them that you
Correct.
don't forget the trauma, but the effect generated is processed and you heal, but you
And
remember the event.
correct. And in history, they say forgive, don't forget, because you have to learn from the past. Otherwise, you will be condemned to suffer the same thing again. So you may not want to take revenge from somebody who has done a historical wrong to your group. So you forgive, but you don't forget what has happened, so that you don't allow it to happen in future. So in normal sense, we say forget and forgive, or forgive, don't forget. But there, the word forget has a very different meaning. It's a meaning of let go. It's not actual forgetting the way we are referring to in this discussion.
Right. So, does the memory also play some role in this forgetting, or it's just purely psychological every time?
Memory plays a role in two ways. One is you can naturally forget when something is unused for a long time. Second, you can have biological issues related to memory. So you may have blood pressure, you may have old age, you may have an injury, you may have some uh, microbial difficulty in the gut. All of that can affect the memory in different ways. So there is a set of reasons, biological reasons of forgetting. There is a reason or natural reason for forgetting. And there is a set of psychological, psychoanalytic reasons what we are going on for forgetting. So when we say pathological forgetting, essentially we are referring to the psychoanalytically driven forgetting.
So, can we go deeper into each one of them, the different psychological forgetting?
Yeah. Uh, let's say we start with repression. So any event which involves unbearable feelings of anger, pain, guilt, shame, envy, anything unpleasant, that is repressed. And when that is forgotten by repression, things associated to that may also get repressed simultaneously, and there may be a collateral damage, so to say, of forgetting. So that is one part of the repressive part of forgetting. Then we have the cognitive thought disorder, in which there is an attack on linking, and there is a difficulty of storage, processing, or retrieval. And the attack on linking will happen primarily out of narcissistic rage or envy. And the storage and retrieval problems, primarily, if there is no biological cause, will be related to some form of containment issue and very high anxiety related to retrieval of any kind. So there will be a catastrophic thinking associated with retrieval deep inside the memory. So this is the second part of cognitive thought disturbance, which will lead to forgetting and forgetting primarily out of retrieval rather than from storage.
Right.
Also processing. Yeah. Then we have the multiple identity disorder, where the split, rather than being horizontal, there of course is a horizontal split between the conscious and the unconscious, but there is a vertical split in the ego. And what happens is 2 or 3 personas inhabit the same person, and they have such walls that one does not know the other. So there is a kind of a interpersona forgetting, that every persona remembers only his part and not what the other personas are doing. Say, for example, we had an example of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. One person who is a doctor in the morning and monster in the night, and both parts don't know about each other. This has gone to such an extent that there is actually a documented case of multiple personality where one personality was diabetic and the second was not.
Oh my God.
Which means that the split actually went not only across the psyche but down into the body. And that was surprising, because this is as surprising as when Freud found that talking cure can produce neurochemical changes and lead to health reinstitution. That kind of a fundamental thing we find in this documented case. So what we see is the desires are too many, repression is too much, fears are too many, and the hodgepodge is such, and the ego strength is very high. So the person does not go psychotic, but actually lives out, so to say, psychosis in practice. So we have very high desire, very high repression, very high difficulties, and very high ego strength. It's a classic combination for a multiple personality disorder. And there is a forgetting of a very different kind, forgetting by personas. And you can also add one more, the forgetting of the artistic personality, where there is a spontaneous disintegration of the type that Kohut talks about in the uh, fragile self,
Hmm.
what Kohut would call a borderline self. So you may not have borderline characteristics of DSM, but in terms of fragility, what Kohut calls the borderline fragility, that fragility would be there of disintegration. And so you will have a very different kind of thing where there is a spontaneous disintegration, and there is no ability to think in a structured way or to process and retrieve what has been put inside. So that's a very different kind of artistic disintegration, which leads to forgetting. So these are very different kind of pathological forgetting that we see in process terms, why they happen.
Is there anything else to it?
Yeah, the outcome will be very important. For example, if you are having a repression based forgetting, it will lead to tiredness, listlessness, low energy, low creativity. You will practically say goodbye to being alive in one corner of your life. It can lead to a long time dysthymia. It can lead to a long time cyclothymia. All this kind of things will revolve around this kind of forgetting, because the affects which are deep inside will find a way of producing symptom of some type if there is such a voluminous effect. So all these concomitant conditions will usually accompany the kind of forgetting that we are referring to. It is not that the forgetting will happen and nothing else will happen, because the moment we come to pathological forgetting, it means that something is so difficult that it has to be forgotten by some pathological process. It will inevitably create its own collateral damages in the area of psychic health or somatization.
Um, there was this case of a young man somewhere in his late 30s. And whenever we talked in the session about his past, he would simply smile and try to say that somehow I don't remember much. Um, Other than the developmental milestone driven kind things like, okay, this was my school, this is what I have been. But if you take him to effect or any kind of memory based thing, there was not much of material being generated. So I want to ask you that uh, even to retrieve something, there has to be enough of thawing, which allows the linkage. If we go in the Bionian sense, there was something, there is no reason for him to come for the therapy other than for a couple's therapy. The wife is undergoing something, so he's part of the therapy.
Right.
But I was concerned because I wanted to learn what is happening in this system of the psyche.
Hmm.
So, what are the possible reasons? Because there's no trauma. Sometimes when parents are not giving enough of challenge to the child to learn, to decide. In his real life, he's pretty functional. It's just he has little bit of inertia in his system. So, what can be the particular process which we can explain here?
Or two, three things. One is there is some deep anxiety in him which prevents him, or rather, which does not allow him to allow you to go inside of him.
Even he himself cannot reach there.
Correct? That we won't hold against him. But the fact that he does not make efforts and tries to rationalize is not making an effort, that we would focus upon.
All right.
That uh, capacity one can condone, but where is the intention?
Right.
So the point that there is no intention to go in is a point to be focused upon, because there is no will to explore oneself and get well. There is a helplessness. The will has been resigned to helplessness, and that itself can be a defense. It may be a sign of incapacity, it may very well be a defense. So, two, three things can be done. One is in this kind of things, uh, in some cases, what is called head on collision works.
Okay.
Now, that will work if somebody is uh, deeply motivated to get well and has this problem. Then, in that case, there is a ISTDP technique called head on collision, where you just say that if you just can't remember anything, then we just have to accept it, it is so, and there's nothing we can do about it. Because if you don't try to remember or you cannot remember, we just have to accept it and put a full stop there.
Hmm.
So it is for you to reflect whether you would like to continue to make efforts or you would like to accept it. And if you just accept it, we'll have to end the therapy, because I think there's
Hmm.
nothing we can do with the material that you have given. And if that is all that you can give, there's nothing we can do. That's a head-on
Hmm.
collision. Many people turn back and say, no, I will be sincere and work hard and so on and so forth. In some cases, people take it to their ego and they leave therapy. And they go out and complain about the therapist that I was genuinely not capable. And instead of addressing my incapability, she dismissed me for being incapable. Now, what kind of therapy is this? Instead of building capacity, you dismiss people for incapacity. If there was no incapacity, why should anyone go to a therapist in the first place? That kind of argumentation will start.
Hmm.
Now, the second group will be where uh, they will not respond to head-on collision, but they will
Okay.
respond to long-term holding and long-term coming to ease with you. And over a long period of time, automatically they will start without saying anything, remembering those things.
And sometimes it's not even, as you just mentioned, after a long association in the containment and holding structure, they do not recollect anything, but now they play out all their primal res- uh, feelings which they had for their parents by, ranting to the parent, which they would have not done there. So ranting to the therapist about things, some dynamics do show up there, but nothing gets make them get activate the active memories of those years.
Correct. So over a long period of time, it will happen.
Okay.
And what can help is dreams and psychological testing.
Even for dreams, they never come up with dreams because I think this person cannot visualize anything. So even his dreams are just some feelings, no visuals.
So it's a very different kind of a person, and you will have to try a variety of tools to whatever works for him, because it may also have some neurological base if you just can't visualize anything. At present, we are looking at it more as a hysterical phenomena. Okay, he is incapacitated by a psychic phenomena, not by a structural deficit. So I think over a period of time, something should come out.
And is there a possibility with certain personality disorders to adopt more of this for intentional forgetting or selective forgetting, like narcissists during their rage, for OCD spectrum people with regard to the compulsive, where the amygdala is over responsive, so it just cut off the other memory routes? How the personality, different personality disorders respond to this forgetting in your practice? How you have experienced this?
Uh, Forgetting out of anxiety is usually short term forgetting. It's like somebody going to the examination hall, getting very anxious and forgetting what
Right.
he knew outside the hall.
Right.
But once the event is over, the memory comes back. Now, with OCD, I have seen a group of OCDs who actually have a very radically different difficulty. They have a difficulty of remembering, that they want to forget and they cannot forget. So in OCD, this also is a group that
In OCD, sometimes I have seen when you ask them pre OCD, they don't remember anything.
correct,
But
correct,
yes, what you're saying in their compulsions and all, they are trying to forget, but they are remembering everything. In fact, it is overactive. But if again you take them back, there's not much of memory.
true. So attention to detail, which is a characteristic of OCD. Post the onset of OCD, that is very active. But you rightly said, before the OCD, there is a kind of an amnesia, forgetting.
Yes.
And that has to do primarily with the Oedipus,
Hmm.
right? Because Freud bases OCD into Oedipus,
Right.
and Klein bases it into the split phenomena.
Let.
So in both these cases, there is repression. So there can be a split based repression or a Oedipus based
Edible.
repression, or in some cases both. And therefore, before the onset, they won't remember. And the onset usually will be puberty. So there will be a difficulty of pre-puberty events, right? And even more difficulty of pre-5 year events, and even more difficulty of pre-2 year events. Because
Similarly, in bipolar, during their maniac episodes, there's less of memory of what is happening there.
correct, correct. So that also happens in many cases of psychotic episodes. Also, it can happen that there can be selective memory losses of microtype of particular parts, and those will be the parts where the most difficult parts have been active. So in psychosis, it will be direct activation of that part, and in mania, uh, it will be sadness or anger, which is in the unconscious, and in response to it, by reaction formation, a manic response is being given. So in the unconscious, when those parts are activated very highly, whatever you do manically, that part will be forgotten because that is linked
Forgotten.
to the most difficult activation in the unconscious.
Even in NPD, the narcissistic rage tends to dissolve so many active episodes and situations, and people's episodic memories also erased. Is it due to the
So
high amount of anger generated?
yeah, we'll have to differentiate here between deactivation and forgetting.
Okay.
Deactivation is primarily uh, taking focus out of something and putting it from the conscious to the pre-conscious.
Okay.
And forgetting essentially is putting something from the conscious to the unconscious. Because the nature of
All right.
pre-conscious is it can be activated on demand. You don't
Right.
have the defensive forces working there. It is just a utilitarian, practical way of allocating the processing power to one thing and keeping the second thing in the pre-conscious till this activity is over,
It's
and then
over.
again for processing. So it is kind of a cupboard,
Halt.
in the factory, in the manufacturing workshop
Unit. Yeah.
unit, where some processing has been done. You put it in the cupboard, you work on something else, again coming back. So that cupboard is like the pre-conscious. So
Okay.
the deactivation, which is temporary, is very different from forgetting, because that deactivation is like in between of remembering and forgetting. If remembering is something active and forgetting is something unconscious, defensively repressed, or somehow acted upon defensively, then deactivation is in between the two, remembering and forgetting. So deactivation is different. It's essentially a um, making something go from the conscious to the pre-conscious.
But even in case of shock and extreme traumas, people tend to erase certain part, and there is a possibility another shock can reactivate. So will it be called in forgetting, or it will be still seen as deactivating and activating?
Nahin. Deactivation has a connotation of getting active on demand.
All right. Okay.
So if you ask somebody, "Okay, where did you live in the year 1995?" Right?
I
So he
get
will
it.
say, "I lived in Bhopal," and you say, "Which society?" He says, "I forgot the name of it." After 2 minutes, he says, "I got it."
Hmm.
Right? But right now, so that is a kind of a natural forgetting, and it was deactivated. The city name was deactivated, and the society name was naturally forgotten. So deactivated became active the moment demand was there, and the moment you put in some pressure, the the forgotten society name came up. But at the very moment where he is living, right next to his house, there is a shop, and he always forgets the shopkeeper's name. Now that's a very different kind of forgetting. That there is some defensive action involved there.
Involved there. So, to coming to the positive aspect of forgetting, is there any, first of all?
Yeah, there are many actually. One is, it is we are creatures of pleasure, so it's a kind of pain management. Second, it allows us to go on with our lives because survival may demand focus on something other than these traumas. And one may not have the luxury of sitting with these traumas the whole day to resolve them. So one may have to put them aside for later and focus on the emergency part of something expedient. So that is second part of it. Third part of it is, it may be a capacity question, that one may have deferred dealing with something because the capacity has not built up. Fourth, maybe one is waiting for somebody safe enough to be found, somebody good enough to be found, somebody a good container to be found, and only in the presence of such person can that processing be taken up. Right? So one may be waiting. One may be waiting also for a life experience, that only that may unravel that trauma which leads to forgetting. So there is a variety of ways why the postponement, the non-engagement, the keeping aside may be very purposeful. And as one says, you have to forgive something in everyone, which means you have to forget something related to everyone. And it may very well be a normal part of life that one has to forget and forgive and move on. So it's a very purposeful activity. It has a lot of positive outcomes to it, not only the difficult pathological outcomes. The process involved may be pathological, but it is at the service often of something sublimated.
Talking about this psychological amnesia, our clients often talk of this forgetting, as we discussed prior also. We can deep dive into it across their lives. They have these, specific time periods where there is no much of uh, memory with regard to the feelings, especially. Episodic memory is very clear, but the psychological memory with regard to the effect is very, very faint, very dissolved kind of.
That
What
is
is
more,
happening there?
so that is more common. forgetting both the idea content and the feeling content is less common than remembering the idea content but forgetting the feeling content. And that is true for a large section of population. Second part, some group will be living with people who are almost like trauma machines. So the traumas keep happening day in and day out, and therefore it has to be evacuated in some way or forgotten in some way. The third part may be that the cognitive memory is divorced from the affective memory, because when that event happened, affect was repressed and is still repressed. But the unconscious moving of that affect can be seen the moment you are exposed to that situation. Say, for example, somebody, I'll give a live example. Somebody was very attached to the society he lived, and
Mm.
that society went in for redevelopment. So they vacated the society, went on to live somewhere else, and this boy came when the buildings were being torn down. And the boy was around 22, and he had lived all his life there, all the memories were there. Even now, when he passes by that road, something moves inside of him. It's very unsettling, it's deeply nostalgic, very strong emotions are whirling inside of him, but he can't make out, he can't experience them otherwise. So when he goes to the situation, he feels something moving inside. In the therapy room, he can't recollect them, it's too repressed. So this is one of the classical elements of isolation of affect applied to a particular event. A very different kind of emotional forgetting.
So, what happens in the healing space? Is it that once the client is in therapy, forgetting works in a different way, special way? Is it that there is total retrieval? What happens in the therapy space?
A lot of things happen. One is the healing process which happens. So he finds a good, reliable, stable object, a safe object, a container object, and this allows him uh, to really go back to the things he was afraid to go back alone or afraid to go back in presence of a persecuting person. So the healing process sets on, partly aided by the frame and partly aided by the knowledge and partly by the personality of the therapist. So this goes on, and over a long period of time, the forgetting reduces, catharsis happens, recollection happens, and what Freud says, uh, you convert reminiscences to remembrances. And that involves healing and integration. Second, there are some specific kinds of forgetting which happen when you are in therapy. For example, forgetting to come for the session,
Mm.
forgetting the time of the session and coming late, forgetting to pay, forgetting some event across the whole therapy, no matter how long the therapy. It can go on for 7 years and still some things can never come up. Forgetting something to, till the end of the session comes, that the person remembers most important things only in the last 5 minutes. Uh, Forgetting of dreams, right? Even more than before. And uh, forgetting what the therapist has asked us to do. So these are the specific, some very special, unique types of forgetting which happens once you are in therapy. And outside of therapy, probably they won't happen, but unique to the situation of therapy, some special kind of forgetting happens.
I hope there is no transference of forgetting between them, the
Uh, it,
therapist and the client,
it happens. It happens.
especially forgetting the session itself.
Yeah. Forgetting the session or forgetting particular event. So in forgetting the session, often there is a projective identification of I am not worthy enough of being remembered. So you forget because the client has put into you silently that I am not worthy enough of being remembered. So you forget only for that client and no other client. So it's not characterological issue. It's not that your personality is such that you are careless. It's not that you remember the sessions of people who pay more and forget the sessions of people who pay less. That's not the time. Right. The issue is the projective identification has made you forget. So he is communicating to you, I am not worthy enough of remembering. This is what has been my life. This is how I feel. The second is forgetting in session of some event. This is what we call the unconscious collusion. That what is disturbing to the client is also disturbing to the therapist, given his own capacity and personal history. So there is a collusion not to remember certain things, and it's an unconscious collusion which facilitates the permanence of that forgetting.
So, what is the way out?
Uh, the way out is one, good supervision, good personal therapy of the therapist himself, and the third is like any other entity in the psychic arena, uh, forgetting has to be optimized. Pathological forgetting has to be overcome or minimized, and the purposeful forgetting, the positive aspect of forgetting, has to be maximized or enhanced. So ultimately, we come down to what we come down every psychic variable optimization. Forgetting has to be optimized.
Lest I forget, let me say I will remember this discussion on forgetting. Hope you all like it. See you all again. Namaste.
Namaste.